There is a corner of northwestern Italy where the Alps curve around in a dramatic arc, and in the valleys and hills nestled at their feet, something truly remarkable happens with wine. The region is called Piemonte, which means, literally, foot of the mountain. And honestly, that geography is doing a lot of work here, because the Alps don't just frame this place visually, they shape everything about it. The way cold air falls through the valleys in autumn, the fog, the temperature swings between long, warm days and sharp, cool nights that preserve both acidity and aromatic precision in the grapes, pushing them right to the edge of what they can carry.
The mountains curve around in a great horseshoe to the north and west, and the land opens southward toward the Apennines. And in that bowl, something happens with wine that doesn't happen anywhere else on earth. In certain circles, spoken quietly, carefully, people suggest the wines here sit alongside Burgundy, Bordeaux, the Rhone, as among the most significant wine territories in the world, sometimes above them. I don't want to get into rankings, but the suggestion is not ridiculous. Piemonte is not one place, though. I mean, the name is one place on a map. But the wines are not one story, not even close. You have the Langhe Hills in the south, where the most celebrated wines are made. Across the Tanaro River, the Roero, on older sandier soils where everything softens and lifts a little. The Monferrato Hills spreading eastward, where Barbera is the dominant voice. And far to the north, the Alto Piemonte, rising toward the mountains, cooler, more volcanic, almost philosophically different from anything the Langhe produces. You can have a label that says Piemonte on a wine you should open tonight with salumi and friends, and a label that says Piemonte on a wine that will not give you a single thing for 20 years. Same region, completely different universe. The soils? Okay, hang on. The soils matter more here than almost anywhere I can think of. In the Langhe specifically, you have this fundamental split. Helvetian soils on one side, Tortonian on the other. The Helvetian soils are older, more compact, richer in limestone and iron. Communes like Serralunga d'Alba and Monforte d'Alba sit on them, dense, iron-fisted wines that sometimes feel almost aggressive in youth, like the wine itself is telling you to come back in 10 years. The Tortonian soils, softer, more marly, show up in Morra, in the village of Barolo itself, more fragrant, more generous, more willing to give you something early on. The same grape on soils a few kilometers apart, producing wines you could honestly mistake for different varieties if nobody told you. And in Alto Piemonte, the geology shifts completely. Porphyry, granite, volcanic matter, and the wines respond accordingly in ways I'll come back to. And then there's the fog, the nebbia. Every autumn, it descends over the Langhe Hills in these thick, low-lying banks, and look, it is beautiful in a slightly unsettling way. It comes down during late ripening, tempering the heat, contributing to that aromatic lift in the wine, that haunting quality you sense in the glass before you can name it. Many people believe the fog actually gave Nebbiolo its very name. The fog helps make the wine what it is. That's either poetic or slightly insane, depending on how you're feeling about it.
Let me talk about Nebbiolo, because this is the grape that put Piemonte on the map, and it is one of the strangest, most contradictory varieties grown anywhere. The color in the glass is pale, translucent at the rim, brick-tinged even when young, which tells you nothing, absolutely nothing, about what's coming. 'Cause the tannins are fierce. The acidity is ferocious. Young Nebbiolo can feel almost combative, like it is not particularly interested in making you comfortable. And yet the perfume. Hang on, this is the part. Fresh cherries and dried roses, orange peel and licorice, iron and dried herbs. And then with time, real time, like a decade of time, that perfume becomes something else entirely. Tar and truffle, tobacco and leather, dried violets and camphor and forest floor and faded rose petals. A complete aromatic replacement, decade by decade, that no other grape I know of achieves quite like this. Needless to say, it is also among the earliest budding and latest ripening varieties, which makes it desperately vulnerable to frost in spring and wet weather in autumn every single year. There is no version of growing Nebbiolo that feels safe. The growers here have chosen one of the most demanding varieties on Earth in a climate that will test it every single season. That says something about the people. Now, Barolo. Called the king of Italian wines, a phrase so frequently repeated it risks meaning nothing, but spend time with a great Barolo at 15 years, 20 years, and the phrase reasserts itself. 100% Nebbiolo, 11 approved communes southwest of Alba, a minimum of 38 months of aging before release, 18 of them in wood. Riserva designations extend this to 62 months total. These are not arbitrary requirements. They are an acknowledgement of what Nebbiolo genuinely needs. Each commune has its own geological identity, and this matters more than it sounds. Serralunga d'Alba sits on the most compact, iron-rich Helvetian soils in the zone. The wines here are among the most powerful, most structured, most long-lived in all of Barolo. Austere in youth, sometimes nearly impenetrable, but capable of a magnificence in old age with few rivals in Italian wine. Monforte d'Alba shares that severity. Muscular Barolo with the architecture to develop for decades. La Morra is the counterpoint, more fragrant, more openly floral, more willing to meet you sooner. Though great La Morra ages magnificently too, it's just more welcoming about it. The village of Barolo itself produces wines considered classic and balanced. Verduno, the northernmost significant commune, is perfumed and finessed, more elegant, and only now getting the recognition it deserves. Since 2010, producers have been permitted to declare Menzioni Geografiche Aggiuntive, MGAs, on their labels, identifying specific vineyard sites within each commune. 181 registered MGAs in the zone, mirroring imperfectly but meaningfully the Cru system of Burgundy. The Barolo Wars. This is one of the stranger chapters in modern Italian wine. The stylistic debates that consumed the region through the 1980s and into the 1990s were genuinely divisive, genuinely personal, about two completely different ideas of what great wine should be. Traditionalists defended long macerations, sometimes 20 or 30 days, and large, old Slavonian oak botti of 5 to 10,000 liters. Neutral containers, adding no flavor, the wine breathing slowly in the dark, needing 12 to 15 years or more before it showed you anything. The modernists, led crucially by Angelo Gaia, argued for shorter macerations and small French oak barrels of 225 liters. Wines approachable in 6, 8 years, rich, polished, generous. A different animal entirely. Both sides had brilliant winemakers. Both produced wines of genuine quality. The debate was never cleanly resolved, which is actually fine because both approaches still exist, and both are worth experiencing on their own terms. At the table, Barolo demands food that can actually meet it. Brassato al Barolo, beef slow braised in the wine itself until the meat surrenders completely, is not merely a pairing, it's something closer to a ceremony. Tajarin, the thin, egg-rich pasta of the Langhe, served over butter with white truffle, has the richness to stand beside young Barolo while the truffle echoes its earthy depth. Porcini mushrooms in risotto, game birds slow roasted. These combinations evolved together over centuries in the same kitchens. They are not accidental. Barbaresco. Let me say this carefully. It is not a smaller version of Barolo. It is Nebbiolo grown northeast of Alba on slightly different soils at generally lower altitude, and it produces a genuinely different expression. The tannins are firm, but not as iron-fisted. The aromas lean toward red fruit and dried roses and a silky elegance, more willing to give something of themselves before a decade has passed. That is not weakness, that is character. At the table it belongs beside agnolotti d'Alpine, braised rabbit, truffled risotto. Different conversation, same level of ambition. Now here's where most people stop, and honestly, they're missing things, important things. Because the tier of wines just below Barolo and Barbaresco is extraordinary and dramatically undervalued. In the 19th century, Gattinara commanded prices equal to Barolo, equal, and then it faded, slowly, as the Langhe names took over. It's in Alto Piemonte, the provinces of Vercelli and Novara, east of Turin, west of Lago Maggiore, where the soils are volcanic and porphyritic, and the climate is cooler and more alpine than anything in the Langhe. Nebbiolo here is called Spanna, and it behaves completely differently, more lifted, savory, mineral, with a cool climate precision and an almost Burgundian delicacy. Gattinara requires at least 90% Spanna, minimum 35 months of aging, 24 of them in wood. The Riserva can age for 30 years, not toward truffle and tar like Barolo, but toward a quieter, more composed elegance that is entirely its own. Talk about a wine that deserves more attention than it gets. Ghemme, just across the Sesia River from Gattinara, runs on 85 to 100% Nebbiolo, with Vespolina and Uva Rara alongside. Historically significant, deeply serious, and dramatically undervalued. The same cool mountain seriousness as Gattinara, but with its own mineral signature. A wine that insiders speak about with the quiet reverence usually reserved for things that haven't been discovered yet. Both feel like wines from a different century, in the best possible way. Austere, mineral, patient. Kind of like finding a door in a wall you'd walked past for years. Across the Tanaro River, Roero Rosso sits on ancient sandy soils, marine sediments from when the Ligurian Sea retreated millions of years ago. And those sands change everything about how Nebbiolo behaves. More fragrant, more immediately accessible, lighter in body and tannin, with a lift and delicacy that contrasts sharply with Barolo or Barbaresco. Cherry blossom, cherry fruit, mineral freshness, a clean finish. At a fraction of the price of Barolo, it is one of the more compelling insider opportunities in all of Piemonte. Barbera d'Asti. The grape people call the workhorse of Piemonte, which does it real injustice. What Barbera d'Asti offers is extremely high acidity with naturally low tannin. It cuts through food without bullying it. Brighter and more open than its Langhe counterpart, with a generosity right from the start that makes it effortlessly food-friendly. It can be produced as a bright, unoaked wine for early drinking, or as a barrel-aged superiore of real ambition. A simple chilled carafe of Barbera d'Asti with a plate of salumi is one of the great, uncomplicated pleasures of the Piemontese table. And I don't say that lightly. Barbera d'Alba, grown in the Langhe hills among Barolo and Barbaresco vineyards, shows darker fruit, more body, more richness than its Asti counterpart. The Langhe soils give it extra concentration and depth. Same ferocious acidity, same low tannin, but with a denser, more serious presence in the glass. For decades, this grape was underestimated. Needless to say, that's changing. And the peak of Barbera ambition is Neive. Neive, DOCG, gained its own independent status in 2014 from a restricted area around the town of Neive Monferrato. 100% Barbera, maximum yield of just 7 tons per hectare, minimum aging of 18 months, Riserva requiring 30. This is not the bright, spritzy Barbera of the trattoria. This is architecturally complex wine, dense and dark, with layers of dark cherry and plum and bitter chocolate and spice, and a tannin structure from carefully managed oak that gives grip without heaviness. The most concentrated and serious expression of Barbera in existence. Most people outside Piemonte have never heard of it. I find that quietly interesting. Dolcetto d'Alba. The name translates as Little Sweet One, which is completely misleading. The wine is dry. What you get in the glass is dark fruit, blackberry and black plum, with a characteristic bitter almond finish and a round texture that makes it immediately approachable. It was, for generations, the wine families drank at home while the Barolo aged in the cellar. While the serious wine was becoming serious in the dark, you opened a Dolcetto and ate dinner. Dolcetto di Doliani tends toward more concentration and structure. Producers there have demonstrated that Doliani can carry real ambition, worth aging 4 or 5 years, which is unusual for this grape. And Dolcetto d'Ovada, from the eastern corner of the region, leans rich and full-bodied, the most structured of the 3 expressions. All 3 are best with honest food: salumi, grilled sausage, pasta al pomodoro. Dolcetto is very good at being itself. That's not an insult. Now, the insider tier. And look, this is where things get genuinely interesting for anyone willing to go a little deeper. Langhe Nebbiolo. Nebbiolo, not submitted for Barolo or Barbaresco classification, can be genuinely fine from great producers. More approachable, lower in price, still carrying the full aromatic identity of the grape. A different entry point into the same conversation, and one that's often overlooked by people who go straight for the big names. Carema, at the foot of the Valle d'Aosta, produces Nebbiolo from steep terraced vineyards of haunting alpine delicacy, fragrant and mineral and cool in a way that nothing in the Langhe quite replicates. The terraces themselves are extraordinary, dry stone structures built over centuries, maintained by a handful of families in a valley where nothing about viticulture is easy or economically rational. Boca is deeply aromatic and more structured, from volcanic soils that give it a savory grip and genuine aging potential. Lessona, with its sandy glacial soils, produces Nebbiolo of extraordinary finesse, closer in texture to fine Burgundy than to anything made in the Langhe. Some producers make 3,000 bottles a year. Bramaterra sits on similar volcanic territory, with slightly more body and a richness that makes it immediately appealing even before age softens it. And then Colline Novaresi and Coste della Sesia, broader denominations covering the same Alto Piemonte territory with slightly more flexibility, where Spanna appears alone or blended with Vespolina and Croatina in combinations that feel genuinely different from anything the Langhe produces. The international market barely registers any of these, which is either a discovery opportunity or it means you're already too late. And finally, the culturally essential, the historically rooted, the wines of real personality that happen to occupy a narrower lane. Freisa, aromatic, sometimes sparkling, sometimes tannic, with a wild raspberry and rose character that is entirely its own and has no real equivalent anywhere else in Piemonte. Grignolino, pale, angular, high in tannin despite its translucent color, historically one of the most prized reds of the Monferrato Hills, now barely known outside the region. The contrast between what Grignolino once was and what it is today commercially is a story in itself. Rucche di Castagnole, Monferrato. A tiny DOCG, intensely aromatic, dark cherry and black pepper and rose, genuinely unlike anything else in Piemonte, and one of the more exciting recent rediscoveries in Italian wine. Verduno Pelaverga, delicate and spicy, the kind of wine you pour at a table and watch people try to figure out what they're drinking. And Roero Rosso, a flexible denomination covering a broad range of blends across the Monferrato Hills, where international varieties sometimes appear alongside indigenous ones, and the results range from pleasant to genuinely ambitious. These are not backup choices or curiosities. They are different conversations with the same extraordinary land. And look, before we leave, learning to read a Piemontese label is its own skill, and it matters more than in most regions. DOCG, Denominazione di Origine Controllata e Garantita, is Italy's highest quality classification. A Riserva on a Barolo or Barbaresco label means extended aging from the better vintages. The MGA, Menzione Geografica Aggiuntiva, identifies the specific vineyard of origin, the closest thing Piemonte has to a formal cru system. A label from a producer in La Morra declaring a specific MGA carries completely different expectations than a label from Serralunga without vineyard designation. The soil changes, the tannin architecture changes, the trajectory in the cellar changes. Learning to read those signals is learning to navigate one of the most layered label systems in the world. Most people skip that part, which means most people are leaving a lot of information on the table. Piemonte is not one thing. That's the whole point. And also the whole problem when you try to describe it. 'Cause the simplifications available to you are all wrong. Say it's about Barolo, and you're leaving out Barbera, and Dolcetto, and the entire Alto Piemonte. Say it's about Nebbiolo, and you're missing the generous immediacy of Barbera. Say it's austere and demanding, and you're ignoring a chilled carafe of Barbera d'Asti at a table with salumi and grissini, which is as direct and satisfying as wine gets. And say it's generous and immediate, and you're ignoring Serralunga Barolo at 10 years, still wound tight, still refusing to give you a thing, still promising something that will take another decade to arrive. Every bottle here's a specific conversation from a specific place, made by a specific person who chose to stay and work in one of the most demanding wine regions on earth. That's Piemonte. Quiet, iron-willed, a little unreasonable in the best possible way. And if you're willing to give it your full attention, genuinely unlike anything else.